Today's webinar, Practice Self-Regulation, a Trauma-Informed Approach for Adolescent Sexual Health, offered by Joanne Schledale, featuring her top workbook for sexual health. Before turning this over to Joanne, I want to take just a minute to tell you about the NERI Press. Our mission is to share current research and best practices emerging in our field. For many years, we accomplished that mission only through book sales. But with changes in the last several years in the publishing and technology worlds, we now disseminate knowledge in new ways. Over the last 5 years, NERI Press has offered online courses, a free monthly newsletter, in-person trainings, and now most recently, these webinars delivered by our internationally recognized authors and other experts in the field. To that end, we appreciate our communication with you. We love engaging with you, getting your suggestions, input, and feedback, whether positive or negative. So please contact us with your questions, critiques, or suggestions. Just out of curiosity, how many people have participated in a NERI Press webinar before? Tim, can you please launch the poll? While we're waiting for that, I will talk more about this at the end, but if you find these webinars helpful, we hope you'll consider becoming a sponsor of this series. Like Car Talk on NPR, it's your donations that help make this series happen. If you become a sponsor now, you are guaranteed a seat for every webinar in the entire series, as well as in all webinars for the 2017-2018 series. As a sponsor, we will register you and 15 staff members from your organization for each webinar, and we will offer you a free gift of 2 NERI Press books, Current Perspectives and Current Applications, or 2 other books if you already have these 2. It's your support that allows us to continue to bring these free resources. Before we get started with Joanne's presentation, there are a few things I'd like to share. First, as with all workshops, I want to let you know the learning objectives. Participants in this workshop will integrate empirical knowledge into a clearly defined trauma-informed approach for sexual health and well-being, engage and motivate adolescents who have experienced trauma to promote harm-free sex and prevent STIs, HIV, and pregnancy, promote and model self-regulation skills while communicating hope and optimism. Second, I want to let you know that the PowerPoint presentation will be posted on the NERI Press website shortly after the webinar is over. We will be posting a YouTube recording of the webinar next week. Third, when the workshop is over, be sure to answer the short survey at the end. We would truly love your feedback. And finally, after about a week, we'll send you a follow-up email that has a link to the recordings and links to certificates of attendance, which you can download. I want to talk briefly about the book Joanne will be discussing during this webinar. The purpose of the top Trauma Outcome Process Workbook for Sexual Health is to support young people in making clear decisions that promote health and well-being, particularly sexual health. The top workbook provides a structured approach for exploring the impact of previous trauma on current behavior. The trauma outcome process is designed to simply examine how painful life experiences affect thoughts, feelings, physiological reactions, and behavior. The workbook has been peer-reviewed by licensed mental health clinicians working in child welfare and community health. It was piloted with adolescents in independent living programs and those aging out of foster care. The workbook represents an integration of clinical material relating to trauma and sexual decision-making from a variety of sources and professional disciplines into a format that any young person will understand. We're pleased to offer a special discount on Joanne's book through May 15th, 2017. Please use the discount code May1st, MAY1ST, when you check out to get 20% off Joanne's book. And now I'll introduce our speaker. As founder and executive director of Resources for Resolving Violence, Joanne Schledale provides extensive consultation, program development, and training focusing on empirically based practices. She has made hundreds of presentations throughout North America, Europe, and Africa, focusing on trauma, youth violence prevention, positive youth development, sexual harm, teen pregnancy prevention, and motivational interviewing. Her intervention, Practice Self-Regulation, is being evaluated through a 5-year multi-site federal grant addressing a trauma-informed approach for adolescent sexual health. And now I will turn this over to Joanne for her presentation. Thanks for being here, Joanne.
Thank you, Craig. Can someone just confirm that my screen has come up?
You're there.
Okay. The camera is not working. So, should I just go forward without the camera?
Sure, we'll just conjure up an image of you in our mind.
Well, I'm so sorry because I dressed up for all of you today, And I want to begin my presentation by thanking Neri, with whom I've had and enjoyed a very, very long collaborative relationship. Particularly thanks to Craig, Kristen, Elisa, and Tim, who are attempting to get me through the technology. And Elisa, special thanks to you for helping me condense the presentation. And particularly to all of you who are sharing this time with us, I want to thank you for the work that you do every day on behalf of the young people that you serve. All right. So, let me come back to the title page. I want to just share, Craig has already said that the model is undergoing 5 years of federal grants. We also have a second grant that has come in for a online learning platform that we're working on, and so I'll go ahead and get to it. I do need to share, I'm having a technical issue, Tim, that the technical pieces will not go off my screen. It seems to be frozen. So.
Nobody else can actually see them, though.
Okay. So my apologies to all of you who are waiting for this to get started.
We have your camera on too, Joanne, so we can see you that you've dressed up.
Okay. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Lawrence Steinberg, but he is faculty at Temple University in Philadelphia and wrote a book called Age of Opportunity, The New Science on Adolescence that was published in 2014. And you'll see that I have some quotes from him. And when we were making the decision to name the intervention, you'll see that the word self-regulation is going to pop up several times. And to me, I'm starting out with this first one because of its profound importance, that the capacity for self-regulation is probably the single most important contributor to achievement, mental health, and social success. And it is the central task of adolescence. So this is exactly why we're framing it within this context. Okay, now my screen is totally frozen and I cannot get it. Okay, it just went through. Again, thank you all for your tolerance. So what is affect regulation and self-regulation? It's simply a person's ability to manage our emotions without causing harm to self or others. The key elements are our thoughts, feelings, physiological reactions, and then how they influence our behavior and then become the outcome based on that behavior. And then self-regulation, as you see from the quote from the founders of motivational interviewing, is the capacity to formulate a plan of our own and implement behavior to carry it out. So a key element to me is that affect regulation is in the moment, and you'll see some slides relating to that, and self-regulation is when we as human beings have the ability to create a plan and to try to practice it. The key factors for affect regulation are safety and stabilization, no surprise to all of you clinicians working there, and then multisensory activities to reduce dysregulation, which I will be defining in a few minutes. These include exercise and body movement, healing touch, the use of handshakes, of high fives. It's not some type of special training, but how do we use touch to in boundary-defined ways to promote health and well-being. Expression through art, drama, dance, and music. And narrative trauma scripting is a specific part of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and I will not be talking about that. However, I am going to be talking about the neuroscience base of the multisensory activities. And what we always hope is that this leads to developmental skill building or competency development for the young people we serve. So how it all began, as Craig said, and you see the image on your screen of the top workbook for sexual health. This is actually the second workbook that I wrote. The first one was published in 2002, and it was the top workbook for taming violence and sexual aggression. You can see it in the picture on the far right. And then in 2010, the sexual health workbook was created based on the study that Craig also mentioned. And you see in the center a trauma-informed approach for adolescent sexual health. The creation of this document was funded by the Pennsylvania Department of Health and Temple University and is available to download for free on both Temple's website and my agency's Resources for Resolving Violence. And that was published in 2013, and I was a consultant to the federal government around a range of things at the time, and it was this document that really began what I'll call getting the wheels rolling for these federal grants that I'll be talking a bit about. So what constitutes a trauma-informed approach for adolescent sexual health? First of all, it requires sex education. We have 37 evidence-based practices across the country right now for specific sex education. However, we know that education does not necessarily include change. That practice actually does, and so we need a lot more support for the young people we serve in addition to just what I'll call pure sex education. The next one, as you can see, contraceptives and contraceptive services, is considered mighty radical in the United States and certainly controversial. And we are addressing that within the intervention, as I will be sharing with all of you, that we are promoting delayed sexual activity, which is a criteria for any sex education program to be evidence-based. It must prove that it delays the onset of sexual intercourse. And for the young people we serve, it includes trauma resources, which the top workbook is considered. I will be sharing a few others, and then trauma therapy when indicated. I'm going to be focusing particularly on all except the contraceptives and contraceptive services today. I will mention a little bit, but not too much about that. So what's this all about? Practice self-regulation and the electronic version, which is called EPSR, are considered promising, innovative practices by the federal government. Both of the federal grants are funded. One is funded by the Health and Human Services Office of Adolescent Health, or OAH, and the other is funded by the Family and Youth Services Bureau. The Office of Adolescent Health focuses specifically on health and well-being, both physical and mental health, while the Family and Youth Services Bureau grant also includes youth violence prevention. So I'm thrilled about that component of it. And the goal is to study both of their effectiveness through random controlled studies of youth aged 14 to 19 who've experienced adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. So quick overview, the purpose is to increase their affect regulation and self-regulation in order to promote optimal sexual decision-making that meets the World Health Organization's definition of sexual health. The implementation structure for practice self-regulation is 10 sessions implemented over 18 weeks. Generally, we consider a session a week with extra weeks allowed for missed appointments or other issues. And the facilitators are licensed qualified mental health professionals. It is embedded within standard therapy for youngsters and what we call a drop-in intervention. Then EPSR, the electronic version, we've condensed to 8 online sessions in an e-learning platform with 4 face-to-face meetings facilitated by bachelor's level professions, and we're using juvenile justice in a few states across the country for this study. Since both of the workbooks have come out, were first published, they have been facilitated by a range of different service providers. So we wanted to see if there were differences between master's level and bachelor's level professionals. And you see down at the bottom of this screen that we're right now in development of a 6-week school-based model where there will be school personnel, probably through the counselor's offices, who will be providing it, and we're trying to get it down to a 6-week model for the schools because of the grading time frames that they use. So just briefly, I wanted to mention the adapted ACE score calculator, which we're using in all of the studies, and it was adapted by Finkelhor's group in 2015. The original ACE score calculator had 10 questions, and this one has 14. You can see that I have a picture on the screen. This is from a document called A Trauma-Informed Approach for Juvenile Justice that compares the difference in the general population of teens versus those in juvenile justice. And we certainly see the difference in mental disorders and substance abuse. But I just wanted to point out that in the general population, 25% of young people experience traumatic event exposure, while those in juvenile justice, there's likely 90%. So this is exactly why it's being funded by the feds in an effort to try to support these kids in a way that has not been successful in the past. So we know that once any of us have 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, that we experience multiple domains of impairment. So as I go through these slides, I'd like all of you to be thinking about the young people that you serve and kind of possibly even some in particular as you think about the challenges that they face in receiving services for problem sexual behavior. We know that their neuroprocessing is impaired through their cognition, and I certainly think about thinking errors or cognitive distortions. We know that the issues of attachment are often challenging for them. We don't use the word attachment with the kids. We instead made the decision to use the word connection and connecting with others. Anxiety, self-regulation, self-concept, social helplessness, I think, plays a part in problem sexual behavior and certainly the aggression. But one of the things that was so important about the ACE studies that started in the late 1990s is what we've also found out about the physiological elements of the impact and potential impairment. So we know that it impacts their cardiovascular system, their metabolism, and immunological disorders. And while the federal government is not just concerned about harm-free sex, which is the term we're using for the research, they are certainly equally concerned about sexually transmitted infection and disease, HIV, and unplanned and unwanted pregnancies. So the immunological disorders or vulnerabilities in their immunological system plays a part of concern with the STIs and STDs. There's the addiction, the eating disorders, and sexual disorders. So these are also key elements of why we're providing a trauma-informed approach here. We know that trauma can influence deficits in executive functioning, which includes working memory, analysis and synthesis, our organizational skills, our internal speech, which we simply use the term the voice inside your head when we're working with the kids, and then the emotional and behavioral regulation. We certainly have the dysregulated arousal, which we're going to be talking about in more detail as we go through this presentation, and the maladaptive procedural learning. So we know that many of these young people have difficulties. We know that many of them are in special education and may have challenges around that, and may also need, I'm thinking of the occupational therapy. We know that they may struggle with impaired sensory processing, and look right there's the impulsivity, which often plays a part in the problem sexual behavior. Harm to self and or others. And we are including in our operational definitions that there can be violence to self and or others. And so we're looking at both sides of that. And there's the problem sexual behavior. Okay, so I want to talk now about these 3 definitions because they play a part. Some of them we use directly with the kids, and some of the language you're going to see is not kid-friendly. But we do want to talk about the word arousal with the young people, and we talk to them about the understanding that many in America consider that arousal only means sexual arousal. And this is the definition that we're using, that arousal is simply to evoke or awaken a feeling, emotion, or response. So we're very concerned about broadening the frame because we know that people who've experienced trauma, and young people in particular, may have experiences of a broad range of arousal that influences their sexual decision making, not the least of which might be fear and terror, anger and rage, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. Then the term disturbance of arousal, we never use this language with the young people. You'll see when I get to the actual session plans for the intervention that disturbance of arousal becomes translated to getting upset, and feeling out of control. And it's an experience that tests a person's ability to manage our feelings without causing harm. And then dysregulation is another term that we are not using. We use out of control, exploding, shutting down, and that this is managing emotions in ways that do cause harm to self, others, or both. So the following slides come from Bessel van der Kolk's 2014 book, The Body Keeps the Score, which has been tremendously helpful. And this is a book, while I wouldn't share it with young people, I have shared it with a lot of lay people who are not in our field who have found it to be very helpful over time. So we know that trauma produces actual physiological change, including a recalibration of our brain's alarm system and an increase in stress hormone activity that I think greatly influences agitation and alterations in the systems that filter relevant information from irrelevant. And I think this is vital in understanding kids who seem to be not on point with you, that lots of times their brain cannot filter that which is relevant from irrelevant. This is why people become hypervigilant to threat and why they so often keep repeating the same problem and have such trouble learning from experience. So if you're working with young people who seem to not be able to stop it, this may explain some of that behavior. So the solution is to gain control over the residue of past trauma in order to experience mastery and autonomy. It has got to come internally for these young people to figure out and to consider change without adults always saying, you need to, you need to, you need to. So how do we do this? By allowing the body to have experiences that deeply and viscerally contradict the helplessness, rage, or collapse that result from trauma, which involve movement, breathing, and touch. And this is what they call the bottom up, because it comes from the back of the brain in the more primitive areas. And so this is the emotion-focused work, the body movement, exercise, expressive work that we do is the bottom-up work. And then traditional talk therapy falls into the top-down category, which is focused on through our frontal lobes in our most sophisticated and the newest part of our brain. And this is the talking, connecting with others, and mindfully observing our internal experiences while processing the memories of trauma, which involves our cognitive restructuring, which there you see the elements of the cognitive behavioral therapy. What we have found is that we have got to have equal components of both, the emotion and the cognition focused. And some of you may recognize this photo. It's from the ATSA conference in Chicago several years ago. And I've kept this picture to show that there were about 25 young people who were involved in the juvenile justice in South Chicago. And if they can move their bodies like that, that should be that deeply and viscerally contradiction of the helplessness, rage, or collapse. So we know that trauma almost always makes it difficult to engage in intimate relationships. So this is, again, why we're focusing on the sexual health piece of this, which has a huge amount of relationship focused in the intervention. Agonizing shame about actions one took to survive can cause confusion about whether one was a victim or willing participant. This, in turn, can lead to bewilderment about the difference between love and terror, pain and pleasure, which I think is often at the crux of problem sexual behavior in the young people we serve. So when our emotional and rational brains are in conflict, as when we're enraged with someone we love, frightened by someone we depend on, or lust after someone who is off limits, a tug of war ensues. And I think this statement from van der Kolk really brings up the crux of a lot of the challenges the young people have. We know that conventional talk therapy is virtually useless when nearly every part of a brain tunes out and people obviously cannot think, feel deeply, remember, or make sense of what is going on. One of the things I love is that the newer research is showing that it's not important for us to know every detail of past trauma in someone's life. And this has been a very important change in our field that I think bodes well for our success. because what is critical is that the youth learn to tolerate feeling what they feel and knowing what they know. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this later. So now the following slides come from the Steinberg book that I mentioned earlier. I'm just kind of race through these. That we know that the brain has 3 systems: reward, relationship, and regulation. And boy, don't those 3 words kind of sum it up for teens exploring and developing sexually. We know that peers, drugs, sex, food, and money all light up the same reward system. And the more these centers are activated, the more risks youth are apt to take. And the more aroused they are, the more their judgment deteriorates. How many of you are seeing an equation for trouble right here? And that a supersensitivity to rewards makes adolescents naturally more attentive to the good things that might arise from their risk-taking. And so this may tip the scales that they're going to have sex anyway, whether somebody else consents or not. So we know that self-control requires us to be calm, competent, and confident, and that a key area of what we're doing in the intervention is helping the youth to develop self-control, which involves the following 3 factors: enough emotional security to move from external control to self-management, which is finding ways to be calm and focused; enough behavioral skill or competence to know how to behave on their own, and learning to maintain that calm in response to images, thoughts, sounds, and physical sensations, and that should be that remind youth of past trauma. So it's not enough that they just practice this in calm settings, because they're going to be challenged to manage them in highly aroused situations. And then enough self-assurance to take responsibility for their own behavior, which is the confidence piece. So the most promising efforts to develop self-regulations are activities that promote executive functioning, as I mentioned earlier. We want them to require intense concentration and mindfulness, and strategies that boost self-control and strengthen the ability to delay gratification. Effective programs, which PSR includes, are sequenced. They are active for the youth. They are focused and stimulating through a variety of different ways that the information is provided, and they are scaffolded, which means that they are demanding, but not so much that they overwhelm capability, and they are sustained through practice. The neuroscience shows that youth thrive in settings that promote optimal child development, that are calm and soothing, that provide a variety of stimulating, engaging, and increasingly challenging experiences, which are part of the things that I just mentioned, that respond to a youth's needs with flexibility, and this is one that I think is hard for all of us, that allow for mistakes and poor judgment to be self-corrected with adult support and encouragement. So we've got the research findings here. We know the work is still hard to do, but I think we have a lot of potential answers for our efforts. Okay, so here's the introduction to the session plan. If any of you are on the webinar from the American Southwest, you know these little boxes. And I actually have this one sitting behind me in my office here in Maine. And for those of you who don't read Spanish, it translates to, "He repaired broken and wounded hearts and sold them wholesale and retail." And I believe that we are in the business of repairing broken hearts, often broken through trauma and abuse. And so the session structure I want to share with you is that they have their first introductory session, which I'll go through in just a minute. And then after that, every session is structured in the exact same way, because we know that predictability has a calming effect on the human brain. And so from the second session on, they check in with the therapist. The therapist begins with a predictive question: how's life been since we were last together? How's life better? Then we have a decision dialogue with the youngsters. Have they read the first chapter of the workbook? And they have, there's the expectation that they will read 1 chapter generally a week. And if not, do they want to read it in session? And if they don't want to read it at all, then we will move to each session is split in half with the top-down multisensory activity and the bottom-up, excuse me, I'm getting that reversed. It's the bottom-up emotional focused multisensory activity and the top-down cognitive focused. So that we've kind of divided the sessions in half, and then each session ends with a wrap-up question of how has our time together been helpful to get the client-centered self-report. Okay, so the workbook begins with the introduction is actually celebrating sexuality, and yes, there are some of us in America who both promote the celebration of sexuality while also promoting effective decision making and only making decisions to engage in sexual practices when they feel absolutely ready and that they have both achieved and received consent for any sexual activity. So this is the introduction. And in the introduction, we have the following definitions. The workbook actually has the World Health Organization's definition of sexual health. And what you see here in these three sections is how we've condensed it for the online version. It's your physical, emotional, mental, and physical well-being in relation to sexuality. It requires a positive, respectful, and safe approach to sexual relationships. And for sexual health to be attained and maintained, every person's sexual rights should be respected, protected, and fulfilled. Additionally, in the introductory session, we define optimal sexual decision-making as a thoughtful and planned approach to behaving sexually that promotes the health and well-being of everyone involved. Then we move into motivational interviewing is a foundational philosophy for all of the intervention. And you see here a quote from Miller and Rolnick: when you understand what people value, you have a key to what motivates them. So if any of you are familiar with the motivational interviewing personal values card sort, here's just one of the decks of cards. You can download it for free, and we are using this 100% of the time with the young people, and the feedback we're getting is that they're loving it and enjoying it. Then we have them write down their top 10 values and laminate it on an index card that the therapist keeps and the young people keep themselves, and we refer back to it to support the values development that you'll see in just a few minutes with the expert tips for resilience. And here they are. So the youth also get a laminated card that has the expert tips for resilience, and we go over this. And in the interest of time, I will not, because I'm watching the time here. We have these laminated cards available. If any of you are interested, you can email me directly, and we will send you the template that you can then cut out and laminate to provide for the young people. It has the expert tips for resilience on one side and the core components of affect regulation on the back side so that it can fit in their wallet, and they keep them during the 10-week intervention and refer to them in their therapy sessions. So then in session 2, it's chapter 1 of the workbook that is addressing so many choices. The young people create a shield, as you see here in the photo, and this was one young man's shield for learning about and practicing self-protection. And this was a young man who his intellectual capacity was on the autism spectrum, and he was also diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. He had misbehaved sexually and was referred to our agency for services. And you can see right there the dichotomy between lawful and chaotic, evil and good that he illustrated in his personal shield. In session 3, we move into their life experiences, which addresses human ecology, who they are individually, who they are within the context of their family and relationships. And this is where they go eyeball deep into their sexual identity development. As you can see, the gender unicorn here. This is also a free document that if any of you want it, it's available online, and we have permission to use it, where we help the kids explore their identity development. And you might want to prepare yourself. I think the next slide is it's not the anatomy. So let me speak about identifying a calm and soothing place. We do a 5-minute guided imagery that identifies all multisensory experience of a calm and soothing place to prepare them as we get into any of the trauma work, that they can be using this calm and soothing place as a counterbalance for any arousal to the trauma they may experience, not necessarily sexual. And now there's the anatomy. So all of the intervention had to meet federal government criteria for their medical accuracy review board. And so you see there, I wanted to give you some of the image. This is on a laminated sheet that we provide for the kids. They do not take it with them, but this is how we're introducing their understanding of their own anatomy. Then session 4 starts moving into potential trauma, bad things that happen in life, and this is the workbook chapter 3. And this is where we simply ask them to explore those bad things, whether they identify or consider them traumatic or not in their lives. Session 5 is looking for love in all of the wrong places, and this is a flow chart. If any of you want this, I'm fine to send this to you also. We call it getting upset and feeling out of control, which is our term for disturbance of arousal. We talk to the young people about getting stuck and repeating bad behavior, about the 3 prongs there of the explosion through violence and sexual assault, then moving down the dotted lines to the constriction or getting overwhelmed, giving in, shutting down, and freezing up. And the black panel is the solution of regulating themselves, self-soothing, multisensory coping that can lead to healing, stopping harm, moving forward, and getting on with their lives. Then session 6 is actually the trauma outcome process, and I want to honor the creators of this conceptual framework. In 1998, they published a book called Treating Children with Sexually Abusive Problems, and the authors were Burton Rasmussen, Bradshaw, Christofferson, and Hugh. And while we have adapted and changed that, I want to credit the originators of this. And this is the centerfold of the workbook, where the young people can see the influence of trauma, the promotion of healing, and hopefully the exclusion of hurting themselves or others. Session 7 is taking good care of themselves, and this is where we actually support them by showing them what all contraceptives are. We have a contraceptive packet. This is the only time in the intervention that we do this, and this is the CDC's tip sheet on how to use a condom consistently and correctly. And the kids actually have the opportunity to touch the different things and to see all of the different contraceptives. Session 8 is becoming the person that you want to be, and we have them create a self-portrait of the person that they want to be, in addition to some of the other trauma work that they are doing. We ask them at this point, what is the best thing that might happen when you decide to take good care of yourself sexually, and help them explore what sexual health means to them and their vision for sexual health. Session 9 is helping them to pursue their dreams, and the section in the workbook actually has space for them to write their dreams down and how they hope to achieve them, and who will be supportive of them through that process. And then I think this should be the last slide, that session 10 is creating a vision for optimum sexual decision making, and this is a favorite poster of mine from the New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs, to create a world without sexual violence. So I am finished at this point in time and happy to open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Joanne. That was a really exciting presentation about a trauma-informed model for dealing with problematic sexual behaviors. While we're waiting for some questions to show up, would you tell us if you have any information on follow-up data for children or adolescents who've gone through this program?
Yes, we're at the 9-month point for the first study. The other study is beginning July 1, and so far our fidelity monitoring is in the, I think it's in like the 95, 96 percentile, and the youth feedback that we are getting is frankly tremendously positive. I don't have the specifics in that, but I'm happy to share if people are interested. I get monthly reports on the youth feedback, and they take 3 questionnaires along the way before, at the 18-week point, and then at the 9-month point.
Terrific. Now, Tim, I am not able to see that anybody has typed any questions in. I can see the list of people who signed in and identified themselves early on, but I cannot see any questions. Can you see them on your screen, Joanne?
No, I don't see any.
All right.
I do.
Can you can you just go ahead and read a couple, Tim, please, because I cannot see them on mine.
Sure. One person asked, where is the download for the card sort for MI? It's a little small. I apologize.
I know that it's in their 2013 edition of Motivational Interviewing book. That's where we got it. If you want to email me, I've got it downloaded and can send it. Other than that, I guess you would have to Google it if you don't have a copy of the book. But I'm fine to share it or to get the website and share it with Neary so that you can put it on your website.
That would be great. We will do that for sure with the PowerPoint.
Okay. The next question is, how much prior trauma TX is recommended?
Oh, not necessarily any. What we do in the original intervention is each therapist decides when they feel like the youngster is emotionally stable to be able to do that. And we're hoping that they are building that capacity just through the therapeutic process. And when each therapist feels like this youngster is stable as we make any decisions clinically, then they let the research team know that they're ready to start the intervention. So we have, I would say what we're seeing is probably the average is therapists are having about 3 or 4 sessions and inviting the young people into the intervention about that time.
I can see a few of the questions now, Tim, so I'll pick out a couple of them if that's all right. Do you have a version of this program for clients with intellectual disabilities?
This one has been tested on youth with intellectual disabilities, and we are using it very successfully. I would say at a mild to moderate range of intellectual impairment. If we get to profound, I would probably not recommend it. And what we built into the study was for any youth with any levels of intellectual impairment to assess as we would therapeutically. Both of the workbooks were piloted in programs that specialize in services with youth with intellectual impairment.
Do you see improvements in both their sexual decision-making or behavior and in their self-reported PTSD symptoms or trauma symptoms?
Because I'm not the researchers, I'm trying to think of what they're finding. I think yes, because the kids are talking about and self-reporting on managing more universal areas of their life, just how they're managing anger without getting into trouble. So in the frame of any harm to self or others, not just problems with sexual decision making, we are seeing a broader frame there.
Great.
I should say the broader frame in the symptom reduction.
Mm-hmm. How do you go about helping young people who are in denial about the trauma that they have experienced?
Oh my goodness. We certainly have dealt with that. And in using the A-score calculator, we've had young people who didn't identify, and then later on, as I think is pretty typical in therapy, I know that they were dealing with that at one of the sites, and because we did a consult on it, and we simply asked the youngster, did they want to continue with the intervention, even if they identified that they did not experience these kinds of things. And actually, I think now that there were 2 young people I think they both decided to stay in, and kind of, you know, that teenage thing where they kind of shrug your shoulders and go, oh, I guess so, and chose to stay in the intervention, which we thought was kind of interesting.
Great. One, just a mechanical kind of question. Someone asked if the PowerPoint would be available, and yes, it will. It'll be on the NERI website within a week, I believe we will have it there. Let's see. How do you... Oh, the questions keep moving around on the screen. Isn't that helpful? There was something about how do you integrate the bottom-up activities, and what types are there, and when do they occur?
We try to have bottom-up activities in each session. So we have some conversation, but we have multisensory activities in each one. And you might consider that doing a motivational interviewing card sort is a multisensory activity. They have a deck of cards, they're looking at it, they're using their hands and moving. They do a variety of art therapy exercises. One is as I mentioned, creating a self-portrait of the person they want to be, so they're drawing with markers. They have Play-Doh that is always in session that they have available. So when we think about the multisensory, it's really, to me, something that's very easy to do in having the young people thinking about what they're doing and mindfully observing their activity while keeping busy and doing things. We do breathing exercises. Oh, I want to mention two Sesame Street videos that have been, the kids consider very successful, that you can get online on YouTube. One is called Elmo Belly Breathe with Common and Colby Caillet, and the other is Cookie Monster But Me Wait, about self-control. And so we have the videos, the two videos that they watch, and then a range of the art therapy and multisensory activities.
Fabulous. Do you incorporate trauma-informed yoga into your work?
I do not. I am not trained in that, but I am a big proponent of it, and I say to all of you out there, any of you who can, please do. The research is just coming out very good for it. We promote a lot of exercise and body movement with the young people and ask them to report back to us on what they've been doing in between sessions. So any kind of exercise and body movement, and particularly the kids who are like moan when they think about exercise, we really want to promote just body movement, dancing, anything that they want to do.
That's a really great question. I think Dr. Vanderkolk had some slides on the National Child Traumatic Stress Network a couple of years ago that showed yoga was more effective than DBT in improving self-reports of wellness and freedom from trauma symptoms. So it's certainly a very effective intervention for some folks.
It really is. And I'd like to also put a plug in for, there's a new book out called The Nature Fix, and they're talking about body movement in nature and the research findings that they have with that also. That walking down a street in a city has different effects than if you're walking down a street that has trees on it. And it's pretty fascinating research if anybody's interested.
Great. Here's an interesting one. Can you share a little bit more about how the SHIELD stuff is done in session 2?
I can, but in the interest of time, I can tell you where to obtain the information for free. Our facilitators' manuals for both of the top workbooks are downloadable for free from our website. I don't know if they're on other websites, but we purposefully try to make them available. You can download those, and each of the multisensory activities is explicitly explained in association with each chapter of the workbook that it is associated with. And you should even have some of the scripting for how you set up the shield, the personal shield, and all of the activities. If any of you want that information and have trouble accessing it, let me know and I'll make sure that we can get that to you. And I'm also fine if NERI wants to put those facilitator manuals on your website too.
Or at least we'll link to them.
Sure.
Here's an interesting question. How do you address situations in which the children or adolescents have a limited range of affectivity or are unable to effectively express or identify their emotions?
I had a little trouble. Would you just read it one more time?
Sure. How do you address situations in which children or adolescents have a limited range or lack of affectivity or are unable to effectively express or identify their emotions?
Okay, got it. Thank you. I was missing some of that. So kind of the limited range of emotions. And they have a choice. We really promote mastery and autonomy based on their personal interests. And we've had some kids who want to go more in the cognitive, top-down approach, and we're going to support that. And so above all else, we try not to coerce them. We use motivational interviewing and just hope that as the relationship develops that they feel safe to identify, and there are some emotion-focused elements of learning to face the emotions that they may be trying to hide from. But we do it, I would say, the word delicate is coming to mind, just very respectfully, because we often assume that it's the emotions that they're afraid of that are associated with any of the trauma. So thoughtfully and carefully would be the succinct answer.
Great. Here's a really important multicultural and sensitivity to faith community issues. You've not mentioned anything about abstinence, even though a great many of churches teach abstinence. How do you think about that in your decision-making process that you teach?
I'm so glad that someone brought that up. Unfortunately, we found that the abstinence-only sex education programs in the United States were a dismal failure, and which is why so much of this research, newer research, is coming about. We certainly promote delayed onset of sexual experience, and we also have strong elements of consent and those kinds of things. We're not using the word abstinence, but we are using but me wait. If you guys watch the Cookie Monster video, we have them in their mind when they watch it in session, change the word cookie to sex, and it's all about delayed onset of sexual experience. And then another word that we equally do not use that I think is important is the word abortion, or any elements of abortion are never introduced by any of the service providers. If the youngsters bring it up, we support them in a non-judgmental way and refer them to reproductive health clinics. And we do not recommend any specific ones.
Great. Here's one I think I missed. Can you clarify the difference between the licensed staff curriculum and the non-licensed curriculum?
Yes. So the EPSR stands for electronic. So it's the electronic. It's an e-learning platform, web-based, with entry through a website. And we have bachelor's level facilitators in juvenile justice offices around the country, and if there is a need for clinical services, each site has a protocol. Some of the sites have licensed mental health professionals on staff, but they might not be on staff every day. So we have protocols for support and clinical backup as needed. And we've been a little surprised at how little it's been needed so far. We're getting well-trained facilitators, which I'm not surprised by. I've always hypothesized that you don't need a clinical degree to facilitate the workbooks.
Great. I think we have time for like two more. So have you tried this treatment with court-ordered or resistant clients, or do you have any thoughts about whether it would work or how it would have to be modified?
Absolutely. The vast majority of kids I've served throughout my career are mandated. However, they are not mandated to the intervention. And so while they're mandated for treatment, yes. And then, Craig, I forgot the last part. What was the last part of the question?
Just if you haven't tried it with those folks yet, did you have any thoughts about how it would have to be modified to make it work?
No, it's the e-version, the electronic version, was specifically created for kids involved in juvenile justice for that very reason.
Great. So one final question, and that is how much and what kind of trauma treatment do you think intersects well with this model? Like, do people do DBT? Do they do other things and you use that same language? How does it fit?
You bet. I think our commitment was to make it totally congruent with everything promoted through NCTSN, through SAMHSA's position on trauma-informed services. We had to meet all the federal requirements of what constitutes trauma-informed care. I think it's totally congruent with DBT. We've got therapists who are trained and using EMDR. So I think our position is to promote all empirically based and hopefully evidence-based services and to make them all congruent for the service delivery.
Great, thank you. And for those people who may be newer to this area, NCTSN is an acronym for National Child Traumatic Stress Network, and the website is nctsn.org. It's a huge clearinghouse for the latest research and some webinars that I think are mostly free, if not all of them free.
Yeah, it's a tremendous resource.
It is. I want to thank you tremendously for joining us today, Joanne, and sharing that information for you. And I'm going to go into the little closing spiel with a little bit of information about our webinars and NERI. So thank you. And
thank you very much, Craig.
You are welcome. Now, we've just done that part, so I'm going to skip to the next one. We will offer limited paid CE credits for our remaining April, May, and June webinars, and that will be through Orlando Mental Health. For details about how to obtain CE credits, please visit the NERI Press website under the webinars section and thoroughly read our new CE process before emailing Kristen at NERI, because the volume of email requests is kind of overwhelming sometimes. So take a look at the information and give Kristen an email if you still have some questions. We want to introduce everybody to the free NERI Press newsletter with updates on research and practice. David Prescott, who is an internationally known expert on children with sexual behavior problems as well as adults, co-edits that along with Elisa Klein. And I have the privilege of reading it before everybody else gets a chance to see it. So that's something that's free, and you can sign up for it on the NERI Press website. You can also learn about how to get CE credits for all past recorded webinars. A final plug for people to become a sponsor to help us pay for these webinars. For current applications and current perspectives are 2 new books. If you have already received these and you're guaranteed a seat at all remaining webinars in the 2016-2017 series. Organizations are guaranteed 15 seats, as I mentioned earlier. We will also do your monthly registration for you. Sponsorship is $98 for individuals and $250 for organizations. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please contact us directly at info@neripress.org or call at the number that is listed there, I believe. It's not listed there. It is 413-540-0712, extension 14. And if you register now, you'll receive automatic monthly registration not only for the remaining 2016 webinar series, but for all of our 2017-2018 webinars as well. And reminder again, the PowerPoint slides and recording will be posted on the website within a week, and follow-up emails will be sent within the week as well. Finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Counseling and Psychotherapy Center, Inc., Jarena and Associates, Gippsland Center Against Sexual Assault, INAJOP, Jim Reynolds, Mass Department of Mental Health, Morrison Child and Family Services, New Hope Treatment Centers, Parkside Psychological Associates, Yarach Counseling, and Youth development Institute. Thank you all for attending. We appreciate your interest, and we hope to see you again at another webinar. Good afternoon.